detecting multiple Leviathan class life forms in the region. Are you certain whatever you're doing is worth it?
Subnautica actually wasn't developed as a horror game initially, but it's no surprise that it can be terrifying. Most people already have a healthy uncertainty of the ocean, and when you pair that with the isolation of being alone on an alien planet, it makes sense that most people tend to find it a little bit scary. Throw in a banger yet unsettling soundtrack and some insanely terrifying creature roars, and you have a great foundation built on uncertainty and fear. Personally, I really hate the open water, and especially not being able to see what's below me, so that's what definitely gets me in this game, but obviously a lot of people find the game scary for different reasons. And for the first few hours, the atmosphere is extremely powerful, and you're kept on the edge of your seat the entire time. But as you progress through the story and get closer to finishing the game, there's a drastic shift in the tone and the overall feel of the game. And that begs the question, why does the game seem to get less scary the deeper you go? At this point, you've read the title, so you know that today specifically I'm going to be talking about the Leviathans, although there are several other factors that lead to this phenomenon. But for now, the focus is going to be on the sea monsters.
Today I'm just a sea monster.
Leviathans are the largest and most aggressive creatures that you're going to encounter on 4546B. They all have great things about them, but I think more specifically in the later Leviathans, there are some missteps that we could talk about where the atmosphere could have been maintained for longer. So we're gonna go through each Leviathan in the order you encounter them and discuss the features that make them more or less scary than each other. And we're just gonna go through 3 simple categories that kinda, encompass everything. And the first one's gonna be design, followed up by behavior, and then we're just gonna call this one environment. All right, first up, we have the Reaper Leviathan. And this is part of the core identity of the game. When you hear the name Subnautica, a picture of this thing probably flashes into your head. And along with this is kind of the first point I want to talk about, is that this thing is pretty much perfect. And in a way, that's kind of a weakness of the game. By front loading the game so heavy with one of the hardest hitters you're going to find in the entire game, it kind of builds up an expectation that there's going to be something to top it as you go on later on, but this really isn't the case, at least in my opinion. So all the creatures after this one feel a little underwhelming just because it's so good, but if they put it later on in the game, it might diminish the experience a little bit from the beginning where it's super scary and tense. The first thing I want to talk about is the scale. This thing is big. It is very big, but it's not so big that you feel insignificant. You're still worth hunting down for the Reaper as a source of food or prey or territory or whatever. This thing will notice you when you're in its territory. It's not something more like the Gargantuan, which is seen in mods, which is scary in its own way, but it almost feels less personal. Talking about the more design features specifically, what's really interesting is the Reaper actually has counter shading, which is something that you can find in nature, where it has, the darker red top, but then the bottom is lighter colored. So, for example, looking up at it, it's a little more camouflaged. And this has the effect of not being able to see it until it's too late. It also just has classic scary features. It's got the mandibles coming out of its mouth, it's got sharp teeth, it's got claws, and it's got a sharp tail. So all of this bundled together makes this, in my opinion, the scariest creature design in Subnautica. It also has an iconic roar, which hearing that in the distance from behind you will give you a heart attack. What is this thing? Oh no, this is bad. Okay, and I gotta swim. The Reaper seems to have the most advanced AI. What do I mean by this? Well, this is the only creature I've seen attack and retreat. The other ones kind of maybe just keep their distance a little more in general, but this one is aggressive. It will go after you, but if you start hitting it back, it will do a tactical retreat. I've also had experiences where it has dragged me into the void. Oh, it's wraps for you, buddy. Free Reaper now. Oh my God, wait. I'm still holding on. Can he cut my rope? Holy shit, where is he going? Sneak attack. Wait, is he alive? Oh no. Uh-oh. 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 Oh, guys, he might have got the last laugh. And this is more than once. This isn't a one-time thing. So I don't know if it has the capability to do that or I'm just really unlucky, but at least to me, it just seems to be the smartest. And lastly, we're gonna move on to like the environmental factors. And I guess just to explain this a little better, this isn't specific to the creature, but it's more what stage of the game you are, as well as the environment around you, each biome. So at this point in the game, the most equipment you will have is the sea moth base, no defenses. Most likely, you're gonna have a survival knife and a sea glide. So at your least prepared, you are going to be encountering the most dangerous creature, which, I mean, I don't think I need to explain why that's scary. There are also roughly 22 Reapers across the map, which leads to a feeling of just being completely outnumbered. There are so many places where you're gonna run into these things, especially early game. Just to wrap it up, this one's pretty much perfect. I have no notes. As I said, maybe they could have put it later on in the game, but then you'd lose the very interesting and tense start encountering them at the beginning. So no notes on this one. In my opinion, it's the scariest. And as we descend, we reach the Lost River, and you start to hear a shrieking in the distance. This is the Ghost Leviathan, and right off the bat, there are 9 of them total, which is less than half of the Reapers, which kind of cuts down on the feeling of being overwhelmed. But these things are much bigger than the Reapers. They're semi-transparent and they glow, which perfectly fits the aesthetics of the biome that they're in, the Lost River. However, while this is a really cool design, I wouldn't say it's as scary. They're a lot softer with the semi-transparent look. While the Reaper had the very sharp claws, fangs, and tail, this thing kind of has a more rounded experience. The sound effects are still just as good in their own way. It's distinctly different from the Reaper. And I think in particular, when you encounter these things in the void, that's when they're at their strongest. So I would make the argument that if they were just removed from the Lost River and left exclusively in the void with something to take their place, that might work just as well, if not better. Now, the design is good in its own way, but I think behaviorally is where we hit our first real issue here. This thing is just not very aggressive, and if you give it a wide enough berth, you can make it through any section that the ghost is in without actually being attacked. When you contrast this with the Reaper, which feels much more like a hunter, this thing just feels very territorial. Which, if that's what they were going for, that's fine, but in my opinion, it's not nearly as scary as something actively pursuing you. Like where I mentioned, the Reaper seemed to be able to have some basic strategy of retreating or even calculating and dragging you to where the void is. The ghost doesn't really seem to possess the same level of intelligence and kind of just will stick to one area and try to scare you off if you get too close. There's also another problem with your environmental conditions at this point. The introduction of the Cyclops and the prawn suit. With the Cyclops, the scale of it, and with the prawn suit, the ability to actually defend yourself. This isn't a Leviathan specific problem, more of just a problem in general that kind of impacts the whole feel of the later game stages, but it does affect them, so it's worth mentioning. When you're in something the size of the Cyclops, you just automatically feel a lot more secure, relative to the size of the ghost or the later creatures we'll get into. You feel like you have a lot more options here. It's almost as if you have a second protective skin over you, and even in the worst case that this one explodes or is destroyed, you're still going to be able to escape unscathed, which takes a little bit of the tension out of it compared to when you're just freediving. And with the prawn suit, you are actually able to pose a significant threat to the Leviathans, and that's all of them, which isn't even a hope in the early game against the Reaper. So there's obviously a stark contrast from that to where we're at now in the game. One credit I will give the ghost is that it still gets up in your face and up really close when it attacks you, which is a problem for the last Leviathan that we're going to be covering today. You're reaching the end of the game. You've arrived into the lava zone, and you hear a roar reverberating through the cavern. This is the sea dragon, and in my opinion, this thing sucks. All right, there's 3 of them in comparison to the 22 Reapers and 9 ghosts, so the feeling of being overwhelmed by a lot of the creatures is pretty much gone. Strictly design speaking, okay, I want you guys to hear me out. You know that picture of like the horse and like half of it is really good and then the other half is just like not so good? That's kind of what this is in my opinion. Like, I really like the back half of it with the tentacles. I think that's a really strong design choice. But as you get to the front, it just the webbed hands just look kind of goofy, just like hanging down in front of it. And just the face isn't all that scary, in my opinion. The sound design, as with all the others, the sound design is good. I don't have any complaints there. They all kind of have a unique sound to them. But I guess now we'll move into the behavior of this one. All right, moving on to the behavior, I think this truly is the weakest part of this Leviathan. It is similar to the Ghost Leviathan in that it seems more territorial. There's such a large vertical amount of space in these biomes that typically this thing's gonna be hanging out way above you and mostly keeping its distance. However, when it does see you, it attacks from a range, which I think is definitely a misstep here. It shoots projectile fireballs at you instead of getting up in your face like the Ghost and the Reaper, which doesn't even really give you a chance to see the Leviathan. I think it also is the buggiest Leviathan. This is the one I've seen the most issues with. Like, I had only spent maybe 20 minutes down there in my most recent playthrough, and I saw it just completely clip through the wall, like gone forever. I could hear it, but I couldn't see it, and I didn't really have any issues with any of the other ones up until this point. So overall, it's glitchy, it doesn't look great, and it keeps its distance from you, so you never really get the full experience of even understanding the scale or the design of it. I wasn't even planning on mentioning this one, but the Sea Emperor, I'll just give an honorable mention, I guess. This one isn't intended to be scary, and this is the final one that you're gonna see as you approach the end of the game, and it's gonna give you your instructions to beat the game. And by that, it's intelligent and it's peaceful, so like, not really anything to be scared of. I will give it like the tiniest amount of points because right when you drop into its enclosure, it can be a little startling when it pops up to greet you, but cool design, not scary whatsoever. It's also worth noting the canonical sizes of each creature. The Reaper Leviathan comes in at 55 meters or 180 feet. The juvenile Ghost Leviathan comes in at about 67 meters or 219 feet, which is slightly bigger than the Reaper. But the adult Ghost Leviathan comes in at 110 meters or 360 feet, which is double the size of the Reaper Leviathan. Doesn't always feel like it, considering you might have access to the Cyclops at this point, but there's a pretty big step up there in size, at least to offset some of the other less desirable design choices, in my opinion. The Sea Dragon Leviathan is 112 meters or 367 feet, which is only 7 feet longer than the Ghost Leviathan, which is kind of just an interesting choice, I guess, considering there was such a drastic jump from the Reaper to the Ghost. The Sea Emperor Leviathan is actually the biggest by far at 160 to 200 meters or 524 feet to 656. But like I said, this one isn't really supposed to be scary, so that's not every Leviathan in the game, but the aggressive ones, and in my opinion, they get scary as they go on. I also made a quick YouTube community poll, and it kind of aligned with what I expected, where the majority of people think the Reaper's scarier, a smaller group of people think the Ghost is scarier, and very little people think that the Sea Dragon's very scary at all. Not to say that these creatures aren't scary, especially in the later half. I think they are scary, but I just think there's things that make them not as scary as the stuff you're going to encounter early game. But anyway, this is just my opinion. If you totally disagree, that's fine. Let me know what you think below and give me your thoughts. But I appreciate you watching all the way to the end. Drop a sub and like if you enjoyed and you want to see more like this. So thank you guys, and I will catch you next time. And as we descend, we reach